Hello and welcome to Fascinated by Fungi Live. Today we're going to be speaking with Gabrielle Cerberville, who is a graduate student and a composer, pianist, multimedia artist, and most importantly, a fantastic foraging educator who I've run into on TikTok. And she hasn't done as quite as much here on Instagram, but I'd really like to share her personality and all of her amazing educational content with you guys. So I am going to be hopping on with her in just a second. I think given some of the other interactions I've had recently, I'm going to maybe disable the comments on this live broadcast, but I see always to talk to other TikTok friends and share them with Instagram. Gabrielle's really impressed me over the years. Hello, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. It is nice to interact in real time in some ways. I think we see a lot of comments back and forth, and we've done live chats, but like actually getting talked to face is like totally different. So
It's very weird. Yeah, it's nice to get to do this.
absolutely. So I was just trying to express to people, I just looked at your website, and your website design is gorgeous. So I need to talk to you about how to make websites look nicer, because mine looks like crap compared to yours. But you're a grad student, and you are a music composer, even though, let's say, you have risen to fame for being a forager, but you, like many mushroom people, come from a completely different background that has nothing to do with mushrooms or foraging and have passions elsewhere in life. So what are you in grad school for?
Yeah, you're not wrong. It is weird. I'm in grad school for music composition, which is strange considering that this is kind of what I do for, it's sort of turned into a job. I never really wanted it to turn into a job, but here we are. But yeah, I write weird music, which is on my website. So
cool. Well, I'm gonna have to listen to some of it. But so is piano your primary instrument? And
you could say that,
okay.
but the fact is that I'm just not a great pianist by any stretch.
Fair enough. What was do you have things that inspired you to go to grad school? Because in many ways, going to grad school is kind of a thing that if you talk about all the stuff that goes into grad school and what impacts your mental health and the fact that you don't make any money and you often end up in debt, all these things, it's going to grad school sounds like a thing that only someone not in their right mind would do. So what made you make the decision to go?
Well, chaotic's in the name, but I have wanted to go to grad school since graduating from undergrad. I love music, but mostly I love just making stuff, and doing that through the avenue of sound art is really fun. So yeah, I got a really good deal coming to Western. It's a great school. I have great colleagues. I have great professors, and they pay me to go here. So,
that's
it works out.
That is one nice thing. If you get into a grad program where they're actually paying you to be a student, they don't pay you much, mind you, which I've now seen the 360 view of your apartment, and I can see, you're not living in the lap of luxury there. You've got a little hobbit hole.
No,
but
I do have a hobbit hole. Yeah. It's not much, but it gets me by.
Did you, so I guess I want to ask about your background, foraging, because, quite honestly, you're one of the best sort of nature educators I've seen out there. Did you grow up doing a lot of foraging, or was this stuff that you sort of learned in your adult life, or how did you come to this knowledge that you have?
So when I was 5 years old, my family moved from New York over to the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. And I found out very quickly that we had blueberries. And
yes, that was my sort of OG original foraging thing too as a kid.
Yes,
yeah,
I love that. So I just got really interested in what was growing. I didn't really have an interest in mushrooms until I became an adult. But as a kid, man, knowing that you can go outside and just stuff your face full of the most delicious berries that you've ever had in your life, that's the dream.
Yeah, it seems sort of like ambrosia come to life when you're able to just go out and by the handful, just stuff your face.
Oh,
and
yeah.
have, blue teeth, and it's just fantastic.
Yeah, and high bush blueberries are such a good example of a fruit that is so much better wild than it is from a grocery store. I know when I was a kid, they've gotten better, but grocery store blueberries were trash. They were just
so bad,
watery and gross. But
as far as I know, a majority of them are ones that are grown down in Mexico, and blueberries in general are fruit that need really acidic soils.
So
Hmm.
there's only like a couple varieties that they've bred to grow in non-acidic soils, and that's the
Right.
majority of what you see in grocery stores. So you have
Hmm.
these like mealy, they're large, and I'll give them that, but other than that, they're like mealy and flavorless and really taste nothing like a blueberry. And so like so many people who have grown up thinking that blueberries are like kind of meh, and you're like, no, blueberries are incredible. Right off the bush, there's this acidity and the
Hmm.
anthocyanin. There's just so much going on.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
sorry. Yeah, don't get
Yeah,
me started on blueberries.
Here in Michigan, we get a better quality of blueberry because a lot of blueberries are grown here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give that to Michigan. Like
Yeah.
Michigan, you do a good job. But
Well, and you guys have the
yeah,
acidic soils, so they're actually able to grow a larger variety of types of blueberries, which is amazing because there's so many like little nuances between different varieties and how they
yeah,
occur seasonally. Like at home, my dad has set up. We have it's not that many bushes, but it's like 8 to 10 blueberry bushes, and he staggered them so that from like the beginning of June to like the end of July, they kind of like one goes off every other week kind of thing. So it's just
that's nice.
you go out in the morning, duck under the bird net, and just kind of sit there like a bear, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
So, you came into foraging as sort of this combination of things that maybe inspired you as a kid and like coming back to the woods as an adult and really getting to kind of rephrase and understand nature as a whole. Was there something about your like musical background that drew you to nature, or like what made you want to go outside and look around?
So growing up in the country, you get very accustomed to being surrounded by a certain type of quiet. And
Mm,
then moving to the city, which I did as an adult, I moved to Indianapolis to go for my undergrad and lived there for about 10 years. In the city, you get no reprieve from sound, and especially like oppressive sound that's man-made. So going back into nature really helped me to find my sense of calm again, and um, helped a lot with some anxiety and some depression that I was going through after graduating from school. So yeah.
yeah.
And then because I'm curious, I want to know what everything around me is. And so foraging just sort of happened naturally.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty human response, honestly, to like be like, I need some nature because whatever's going on in here just feels overwhelming. And getting out in nature is incredible because it's not just being out there; it's the actual physical interaction your body has with nature. By being outside, you're smelling volatiles and various things that are stimulating your system. You're producing serotonin. You're upping your immune response. There's like real positive physical medical reasons to go into nature. Not to mention all the sort of like intangible mental benefits. And I've heard that again and again when I talk to foragers about people are sort of like, I turned to nature when I was going through a really tough time in my life. Me too. I lost a relative and I was having a really tough time. And I was like, what can I do? I can go out and look at mushrooms because that's going to help me generate serotonin. That's going to keep me interested and fascinated and focused on something that's not how bad I feel inside or how sad I am about, losing somebody. And that has been a really powerful tool. So it's great to hear that you kind of went through similar kind of thing.
Yeah, and remembering that we are part of nature, but so often we divorce ourselves from it. There's something really profound about returning to it. You feel much more yourself. I've heard a lot of people talk about how they feel much more themselves when they're out in nature.
Yeah, I definitely, I feel that. And I think there's a sense of that sense of self that you develop while you're in nature that you can then bring back to when you're in civilization and in the city, and you can kind of like draw on that inner self a little bit. You're like, who am I in the woods versus who am I around other people? But those two things can meld and really give you some, for me, emotional buffering capacity. I know for
Yeah.
sure. Especially the fact that we had a weird winter where it was like kind of late, and then it just kind of ended promptly at like, halfway through March, the rain stopped and it hasn't rained since. And so my mental health has been on the decline because I'm not able to go out and go mushroom hunting right now. And there's
Yeah, I
flowers,
saw
but
that
it's
I saw
not
that
the
the
same.
Amanita villosa are drying out. Made me so sad.
Yeah. It's a shame because they're still coming up, but they're just like, they're barely breaking the surface and they're just immediately like shrinking down.
Oh,
So
poor
that is such a
babies.
good mushroom, though. It is. I don't. Do you guys have any like? I mean, have you messed around with edible amanitas? It's kind of a no-go zone for most people. But
It is a no-go zone for a lot of people. I'm very curious about trying some this summer. Not something I'm going to talk about on TikTok because I try to keep it real basic on there. But but I really want to try some edible amanditas.
Well, again, I with extreme caution, and I didn't do this until I found Velosa like a bunch of times, and I'd been like cooking it and giving it to a friend until I was finally like, wait, I'm cooking this and giving it to someone to eat. I'll try a piece. And then I was like, oh man, this is so good. Anyhow, so yeah, amanditas can be really good. But again, you know, I just recently did a video on like how to differentiate phalloides from vaginata.
Oh yeah,
and, like,
that was such a good video.
yeah.
Very clear.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, that was also one that got like immediately reported and banned on TikTok. And so maybe we should talk about that, because that's, you know, I think if there's anyone watching this, it's probably because they heard me or you being like, hey, come watch this on TikTok,
Sure.
from TikTok.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've told other people who I've talked to from TikTok that TikTok sometimes feels like the wild, wild west of social media. Like kind of like anything goes, but at the same time, if you make one wrong step, you're in the jail cell kind of thing.
Yeah, it does sort of feel like the new Tumblr in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It's very random. It's very chaotic. I mean, the algorithm reads you and certainly like gives you a personality profile depending on what you like, what you interact with. But it can be really scary sometimes when you blow up, because I think, you know, you and I make content for the people that follow us. We want to make educational, entertaining stuff and ideally interact with a relatively small group of people who like what we do. But then sometimes you make something that just blows up. And you recently had a video that got like 3.5 million views and 700,000
yeah.
likes, which is an absurd amount to think about, you know, from the lens of Instagram. But
Yeah, it was very strange. I went from having, I'd been sitting on like 40,000 followers, and it was great. I had like 12 people that commented on all my videos. It was always the same 12 people, and they were always the really engaged people that I liked talking to. And then I had a video blow up, and then suddenly there are almost 250,000 people, and I don't know what to do with all of them. And it got very oppressive and felt very toxic for a while. Definitely with people. I think that when you have something of a following, people stop seeing you as a person, and they're just like, oh, I can just say like anything I want to this person, and they probably won't even see it. Newsflash, I do. It hurts a lot when you're mean to me.
yes. I feel that. I've certainly experienced that quite a bit myself. You know, you get to a certain point and you stop being a person to these people and you start being like a public figure or something like that. But like, yeah, we read the comments, and the nasty things people say hurt. It doesn't feel good. It's a rough one, but
It is. It is. I've had to just impose some limits and take some breaks and just
it's good.
get away from TikTok sometimes. It's calmed down. Thank goodness.
That's good. Yeah, it's the healthy thing to do, to take a deep breath. I sort of like, my past week or two has been a little nuts with getting reported and having other stuff come at me. So I've decided to like maybe take a little break and try to like just post some old stuff and be less invested in what happens, which is hopefully be a good thing. We'll see. But it can be really tough to kind of like balance that intersection of mental health, and then, you know, I have a desire to want to teach people, so I want to interact and interface, but then the more you interact and interface, the more you get trolls and other things like that. And I was listening to your live broadcast earlier, and you said something which I really liked, so I wrote it down because I wanted to quote you. And you said to someone who I think was telling you, Gabrielle, you're so cool, you said, trust me, I'm not cool, I'm just a giant nerd.
It's true. I am just a giant nerd. Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate on that? I mean, you know, I feel like I grew up super nerdy too, but now people are like, you're cool. I'm like, I really don't feel that way, but.
Yeah. Nobody thought I was cool before I blew up on TikTok. Nobody at all thought I was cool. Nobody thought that I knew anything. So it's been weird, but I am a giant nerd. I'm just very curious about things. I like knowing stuff. When I was a kid, I probably was a little annoying about it, but I try to be less annoying and more just enthusiastic at this point. But I think that comes across. I'm excited about mushrooms. I'm excited about going outside and eating something. I think it does something to your brain. And I am excited about just like learning new things. So yeah. I'm just a big old nerd.
I fully identify with all of that. And I think it's a pretty common thing in this world of foraging and just places where people who've always felt a little bit like a misfit, maybe because they were too curious, because they were too enthusiastic, doesn't make you a nerd or something to be made fun of. It can make you into a very, very interesting adult. I think kids who don't have passions and aren't interested about stuff scare me more than someone who's like a little too excited about the thing that they're excited about. You know, I'm afraid of adults who are dead inside at age 40. And I'm like, no, like, I want to know people who are in their 80s and are just like so excited to tell you about whatever it is, the thing that they're doing. That spark is what keeps you going. So
yeah, and I've never been afraid of not knowing something. And I think a lot of adults are. Well, I know a lot of people are in general. But I've gotten stuff wrong before. Like it happens. It's going to happen. You know, hopefully if you have like a requisite knowledge base in foraging, you're not going to get it so wrong that you end up hurting yourself. But people get stuff wrong. I'm not afraid of being wrong. I'm afraid of being dead inside.
Yeah, no, I think it can be really scary, especially when you get to the point of like people referring to you as an expert, you know, or tagging you in a video or something like that. And you're just like, it can be scary to say, I don't know, but it's also sometimes the safest thing to say, because you're like, well, I have an idea, I have an inkling, but I'm going to tell you I don't know. And I feel like that's a thing that usually smart people will come out and say first is, I don't know, but here's my best guess. And it's sort of the flip when, you know, when people are on the ignorant side, where they're just like, they tell you exactly what they think it is and then don't admit that they don't actually know, because there's sort of an insecurity there. And you have to be a fairly large person to say, hey, I really don't know this, but I will help you figure it out. And I think that's one of the core tenets of a teacher. And you are definitely like, you know, as a grad student, do you TA as a grad student, or?
I do, yeah.
You do, yeah. I mean, I think it shows, because you know how to teach people, and that really comes across. So.
Well, thank you.
A quick question, because I see something dangling beneath your earlobe. Are those Chanterelle earrings?
Yes, they are. I was just hanging out with my niece and nephew a couple weeks ago, and we were playing with polymer clay. So,
that's so
I made
cool.
Chanterelle earrings.
I love it. Yeah, I bought a big thing of like, not Play-Doh, but Sculpey, you know, modeling clay at the beginning of quarantine, with like, I had every intention of like modeling a bunch of little mushrooms, because I used to build a lot of things as a kid, and I built one Amanita and I didn't get around to it again. But seeing that makes me like, maybe I can make some earrings or something like. I want to make little figures and trinkets because it's fun, and it helps exercise your creativity. So
definitely
that's a good one. But
yeah, it feels good to do things with your hands.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious, how do you feel like you've learned or gained from using TikTok or social media to teach other people? Like, did it start as a way for you to teach yourself and then kind of like became more than that, or?
You know, I started doing TikTok when I moved to Michigan, which was back in July of last year. I had like a good month and a half between when I moved to Michigan and when school was starting. So I had some time, and I knew that I had left all of my good foraging spots behind me in Indiana, so I needed to find new ones. So it became sort of like a video journal for me. And I never joined TikTok with the idea that I wanted to become famous. I just wanted to make stuff. It's the impulse that has really just driven me my whole life. I just want to make stuff. And I saw people making really cool content, like Alexis Nicole makes incredible content. I saw your content, and I just thought, this is really cool that people are just getting to like talk about their weird niche interests. And that they're able to find other people through talking about their weird niche interests that share those weird niche interests, or that are interested in them. So, started making some content, and really it was like nobody really saw my content and it was fine. And then I made a video about finding a giant puffball mushroom, and that went wild. And then all of a sudden I had these people who thought that I was some kind of expert. Which, by the way, I'm not an expert. Just a nerd, not an expert.
Yeah. And that's totally fine. I think even most people who are codified experts would tell you, hey, there's a big degree of uncertainty that I have, because in some ways the more you learn, less you feel like you know, which is a weird paradigm, but is like so true with everyone I've met in academia and science and everything else, where they're like, yeah, I might have become hyper educated, but I swear I know less than when I started in some ways, because now I'm aware of how many other possibilities are out there.
Yeah. Oh gosh, especially with mushrooms, like the number of uncatalogued species, the
Mhm.
number of things that just have tiny variations from state to state. It's crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to figure out in my head how to like, because I mean, I'm sure you get this question all the time, but people are like, hey, how do you tell edible from toxic? And they just want you to give them a rule. They're like, stay away from white gills and avoid red caps and you'll be fine. And that's like just not true. Like fungi,
It's not.
yeah, they don't fit into our human categorization. So you can't do that. There is no rule that you can give people that will be safe for mushroom hunting. And I think that's kind of the root of a lot of mycophobia in some ways, is because we're a little unsure. It's almost like the theory of evolution, because we still have to call it a theory, because we have to say that we're a little unsure of whether or not something is toxic, like makes people very fearful.
Yeah. And people think that everything falls into the category of edible or toxic. And
Yeah.
there's this huge, like, liminal space between edible and toxic. There are mushrooms that are inedible because they're too woody. There are
Hmm.
mushrooms that are inedible because, like a Phylotopsis nigilans, like they just taste terrible or they
Yeah.
smell. There's just like this huge space of mycology that it's interesting, but like not all mushrooms are there for us to eat or to poison people. So
I mean, I
there's no
definitely,
hard and
yeah,
fast rule.
I run into the issue that a lot of people are like, I post a video or a photo of a mushroom and be like, well, what's its purpose? And I'm like, well, the purpose of the mushroom is to be a fruiting organism for the mycelium below. It's spreading the spores. And they're like, yeah, but what does it do for me? And I'm like, does everything in life have to serve you? Yes. There's a weird
Yeah.
sense of entitlement there sometimes with foragers, where people are like, well, this must serve a purpose. Why else are you teaching me about it? It's like, because I'm teaching you because I'm curious. I'm hoping you'll be curious too, I suppose. But
Yeah. Yeah. Not all of going out in the woods is finding stuff to eat. Sometimes it's just exploring what's there.
absolutely. And I think there is within that, there's something to be said for the fact that like when you do learn edible mushrooms, you will go out and that's the way you learn them, is you learn them sort of one by one. So you learn an edible
Hmm.
mushroom, you get confident with finding that, and you go out into the environment and you look for that one mushroom. You are guaranteed, however, to find other stuff. And while you're out there, you're like, well, I might as well pick one of these and try to figure out what it is. I'll throw it on iNat when I get home or look at my ID book. And by learning those other mushrooms, by learning those other organisms too, the plants, the trees, the bugs, all the stuff out there, you become that much more aware of like the ecosystem as a whole, and realize that maybe that
Absolutely.
one mushroom you're looking for is going to be more common in one area versus another area based on the other organisms that are around. So there's real reasons to learn sort of holistically about everything out there in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of like drawing or painting a picture. You can keep it really basic and you can just have your stick figure in the middle, but the more you learn, the more you start to fill things in and shade things and add background and add detail and dimension. And pretty soon you know a lot more than you did when you started. And you're just more proficient, more aware.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can't believe the amount of stuff that I've learned in the last like 4 years of kind of being curious about mushrooms. So much so that I think through a lot of my life, I was like, oh, I'd like to learn about nature, but I never really felt like I had a context or even almost a framework to put it on. And I have a degree in biochemistry, so it's like I understood the physiological reactions of photosynthesis and stuff like that. And that was cool to go out in nature and be like, oh, look at the photosynthesis happening in that leaf. But now like understanding the ecology of everything that's out there, and just like it's so much depth and so much nuance to it all. I love your analogy of like a painting, and like, you draw a block in a shape form, and then over, many years, you could potentially shade and do small adjustments to that to fill out the entire picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. So you're also an artist. I mean, you do, I don't know how many things you do, but again, your website is very impressive.
I have a lot of hobbies.
You want to talk a little bit about like some of the art that you've done, or like, other things that you've done that you're
Sure.
proud of?
Yeah, I do a lot of things. A lot of my like artistic practice is very integrated. So, like I'll build a sculpture, but that sculpture needs to have like sound pumped into it, or I'll make this painting, but the painting also doubles as a piece of music, and somebody has to interpret it. So it's all just sort of tied together for me. I also have synesthesia, so that stuff, those neural connections are like very much connected,
Hmm.
and sometimes like weird ways.
I can definitely see that. And I think in some ways it kind of gets to what I was thinking about nature as being part of like a holistic whole. It's very easy to go into nature and look at individual components, but it's a lot, and that's I think a very human thing, to want to look at a component, isolate it, understand it, try to figure out its function, its purpose, its, things like that. But that's where humans are really good at categorizing stuff. And nature as a whole is kind of like, I don't care about that human categorization, especially mushrooms, because they kind of move in this gray space, like you were talking about, where there's so much about the fungi kingdom that doesn't fit into nice codified little areas. And there'll be an organism that spends, part of its life living inside of a tree, and then another part of its life producing a mushroom, or an organism that's like a soil mold that suddenly then spends part of its life infecting ants and turning them into zombies. And it's wild how little we actually know about the broadest sort of scope of everything. And it's
Yeah.
cool to hear about art that you've done that integrates those ideas.
And I'm sure you've gotten this too, but I have a lot of people in my comment section who are really squicked out by the idea that fungi are not plants and they're not animals.
Yes.
Yeah, that's strange to me that weirds people out, but I guess I sort of get it. It's that unknown that, because how long have we been like truly studying mycology as a discipline? Not very long.
I mean, yeah, for people who don't know, like mushrooms were still considered part of the plant kingdom up until about the 70s. So it's only been in the last like 50 years that we've even recognized that fungi, which are one of the most important forms of life for our entire like carbon nitrogen system around the entire planet and through the evolution of life, fungi have been the great recyclers. I mean, it's fungi and bacteria that help build soils, but like mushrooms and fungi in particular are the ones that really help to like hold water retention, build soils, recycle organic materials, particularly breaking down wood, which is otherwise like bacteria can't do shit to wood. Wood is impenetrable to most things, but molds and fungi are
Yeah,
particularly
but get a
good.
fungal infection in there.
Oh yeah, that'll break your house apart real quick, or your ship, or whatever it is. But yeah, it's wild. I mean, I guess I was curious about talking to you about what we've experienced as mycophobia, which is sort of a weird concept, but like it's a very American thing to be mycophobic, right? People see a mushroom on their lawn, they're like, "Oh, I hate it, rip it out," and you're like, "Why? Why rip it out?" And they're like, "Well, it's gonna
Wow.
kill my
I
kids,
mean,
it's gonna
like
kill my dogs." I'm like,
the lawn could be like the first problem, but definitely, yeah, I run into this a lot, and it's weird to me. But I sort of get it. I mean, when I was a kid, I was certainly told, like, don't touch mushrooms.
yeah, don't touch them; they're bad for you.
And I get it. Like, when you're a little kid, and you're, especially like me, the little kid that wants to put absolutely everything in their mouth, it's safer to tell your kids, like, don't touch that. But I ran into a kid in a park the other day who was about to put, like, wild hemlock in his mouth. So kids aren't necessarily told not to put plants in their mouths,
Right.
but they're being told not to put to not touch mushrooms. And that seems weird to me, because I've run into far more toxic plants than I've run into toxic mushrooms.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I mean, I've said this on TikTok before, but like one of the things that scares me is like there's basically no mushroom in the world that can really harm you by just touching it. The toxins in mushrooms don't diffuse across your skin. There are, however, literally hundreds of toxic plants that can give you, terrible rashes, other bad skin conditions by just touching them, let alone consuming them. And like many of the house plants that we keep around our houses actually turn out to be more toxic than most mushrooms, which is you know, terrifying to me in some ways. Like, you're worried about your dog in your yard. What about the plants in your house, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I worked in a vet clinic for a long time, and um, I was called upon to identify a mushroom that a dog had eaten like maybe
Mm,
4 or 5 times when I lived there, but the number of dogs that came in or cats that came in because they had eaten some like extremely toxic plant, like a cat that had eaten an aloe or something, was astronomically more.
yeah. And I mean, I think that's the interesting thing is that the mycophobia has been perpetuated in some ways because people don't know, and then they just tell their kids, "Oh, don't touch any of them because they're toxic." And you're like, "Well, that seems like almost a wider ignorance of nature in the sense that, like, okay, you tell your kid not to touch, you know, leaves of three, let it be kind of thing." And we don't have easy to remember epithets like that for
Mhm.
fungus because there aren't any mushrooms that'll hurt you if you touch them. So,
Yeah.
and again, there's no rule of thumb to tell like what's toxic, what's not toxic. You can learn general clades and species and stuff like that. And, you know, this whole poster of things behind me is toxic stuff, but it doesn't look that different from the poster below it, which is all edible stuff. So,
Yeah.
you know, do you see a real difference between these two posters? No, but you can go learn those mushrooms one by one too. So,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and there are so many mushrooms that are so easy for even a beginner to identify.
yeah.
Um, maybe we don't have like the same hard and fast rules like in the United States, you can eat any compound berry. All compound berries are edible. But if if you find like an orange polypore with a sulfur yellow bottom, like it's a
Hmm.
chicken of the woods, you can eat it. If you
Yep.
find a mushroom that's the size of a volleyball that's pure white in the middle with no hint of a stipe or gills, it's a puffball. You can eat it.
So you actually last year, I think I noticed you for that puffball video that went viral. But then I was like, I know that we get along because right after that, you posted a video of you making this like awesome kind of like chicken parm or like a puffball parm kind of thing. And I was like, oh man, this girl knows how to
Yes,
cook.
puffball parm.
Um, so what did you yeah what did you do there? You had this massive puffball, which to me I found a giant puffball at age 5, and like that was one of my OG inspirations. So seeing you find that thing, it's just like, oh, I haven't found one that large since then. So yeah, what'd you do with
Just
it?
come visit me. Just come visit me. Like I've got a spot. We'll find them.
Mm,
Yeah, I sliced them up into steaks and marinated it in some balsamic and oil and threw it in some egg wash and panko, fried it up and had like a little puffball cutlet. It was tasty.
that's awesome. Yeah, I'm next time I find one, I want to try doing the puffball pizza too, but probably do the same thing where I
Oh
make a
yeah.
cutlet out of it and then just melt some like cheese and
Hmm.
sauce and just, you know, that. Oh, that speaks
Yeah.
to me on a very base level. Really good.
Yeah. And I think for people who don't like the texture of mushrooms, even though
Mm,
they've really like only ever tried a couple different kinds, the puffball mushroom has such a familiar and pleasant texture. It's not slimy. It's really hard to make it slimy. If you like tofu, you'll probably like this. It's kind of just like a big giant marshmallow. How could you not
yeah,
like it?
it's a big savory edible marshmallow and it's phenomenal. I love it. It's great. I was thinking the other video that you had recently that blew up, that one that went mega viral, was again very introductory, simple information, but you essentially told everybody that like the button, the cremini, and the portobello are all the same Agaricus bisporus species. And I think for a lot of people that blows their mind because they're like, well, I don't like mushrooms. I've tried all three kinds. And you're like,
Mhm.
that's literally just one kind of mushroom. So you like really got to diversify, my friend. Like,
Yeah, it's like saying you don't like vegetables because you had a leaf of lettuce one time,
right.
but
And suddenly you hate everything
yeah.
green because you didn't like that piece of lettuce. Like,
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. But the other thing that came out of that was a lot of discussion about let's call it the Portobello Mafia, and maybe some influence from Mr. Paul Stamets and some, let's say, overly hyped misinformation that has been put out there that is fairly easy to disprove, but because the way the internet works, it's easier to search for misinformation than it is to search for real information. So what
Oh
have you figured out
boy.
from reading, you know?
Boy, that's so true. It's really easy to mislead people with sound bites. And unfortunately, our friend Paul has perhaps unintentionally done this to a large degree with the Portobello Mafia. and some other things he said about like turkey tail and chaga and stuff like that. But yeah, it's not that hard to find that the study that was being referenced in the video that went around with all the misinformation about Portobello was from the 90s. And one can assume that more has been done since then. So the study that was done was on rats, and they were pumping them full of hydrazine, like way more hydrazine than you would ever get from eating pounds of mushrooms.
Artificial hydrazine, not like mushroom puree, but like actual just hydrazine, which is a well-known carcinogen.
Yeah. Yeah, so we almost didn't need to do this study. Like we know that synthetic hydrazine is extremely carcinogenic. Also, the study was done in rats. Studies that are done in rats don't necessarily translate to human application. So if you dig a little bit deeper and you look for more studies that are more recent, you find that there have been studies done specifically on Agaricus bisporus and specifically done on Agaricus bisporus that has been cultivated for consumption. And the amount of hydrazine is honestly negligible. And if you cook your mushrooms, which you should be doing anyway, it will deactivate monomethylhydrazine. So I'm not a scientist, and it wasn't that hard for me to find the info.
I mean, again, and it's a thing that like people will go on and on about how portobellos are somehow evil because they contain hydrazine, and then out of the other side of their mouth they'll tell you about how much they love morels and they love to forage morels, and you're like, bro, like hydrazine is present in morels, and in fact most ascomycetes have some small level of hydrazine in them.
Like Gyromitra have gyromitrin, which will convert into monomethylhydrazine in your system. And this isn't to say like you can't eat this stuff because you'll be like, it's like drinking a liter of rocket fuel. The dosage makes the poison. But it does say something about like preparation matters, and the levels of things matter.
Yeah. Well, I love that point too, because preparation is such a big thing that people just assume they like, again, this weird entitlement with mushrooms. We're like, well, if a mushroom exists, I should be able to eat it, and I should be able to cook it and just eat it and not have any problems. And you're like, yeah, but how many plants do we have that you have to like do special preparation to? Like cassava is really carcinogenic, or it has cyanide in it if you don't prepare it right. I don't know, it's like, even green potatoes, soleny. There's so many things out there that like if you don't prepare it the right way, hell, stinging nettles, which is like one of the most popular foraged items. Well, literally, if you try to eat a stinging nettle raw, it's just gonna.
I'm sorry for your throat and your mouth if you try to do that. This is true of a lot of foraged foods, by the way. Which I know that you know, but preparation matters. One that's brought up often is pokeweed. And people get really anxious about pokeweed. But if you collect it when it's very young in spring and you boil it twice and you throw out that first batch of water, it's a delicious edible. If you wait and you try to eat it at the end of summer when it's giant and has big tasty looking berries on it, you're not going to be so happy with the results.
No, that's very poisonous. I mean, there's also the fact that like in China and Eastern Europe, there's a lot of stuff that they eat that we consider just straight up toxic. You look in a book, it says toxic, we'll send you to the hospital. And that's like, there's a lot of people who eat rustlers and end up going to the hospital because rustlers are very recognizable mushrooms. They're fairly colorful. They're often very plentiful. And we eat them here and people end up in the hospital. In China, they pick them indiscriminately and eat them all the time, except that they almost always boil them, which I think is enough to draw out any of the issues, the toxins that would have issues. And so you see Lactarius and Russula being broadly consumed in Eastern Europe and China, but it's because they just culturally, they know what to do with them that's sort of different. And I think that's really interesting because like we as Americans have certain foods that we're like comfortable doing steps with, but it's this like foraging movement is kind of this like weird intersection of people wanting to get in and wanting to learn and then pushing back on stuff. And you're like, hey, you should prepare it like this. And they're like, well, what do you mean it's poison if I don't do it right? And you're like, well, that's just the way that a lot of things are,
Sure. Yeah. And things like fermentation is kind of the crux of what a lot of us do in foraging, because we have to preserve the food that we find when we find it, because it's not like it's going to be there in 2 months. And a lot of times fermentation is the process that you're using to make something edible in the first place. I know that if you follow Noma in Denmark,
Mm-hmm.
they
Yeah, those guys
are
awesome.
oh, they're so awesome. I want to go there so badly. But the cornerstone of what they do isn't foraging, it's fermenting.
Yeah, preserve. And I guess I wanted to ask you about that because I've tuned into enough of your lives to know that you're a pretty proficient cook, and you got a lot of cool projects going on. I mean, again, your apartment was full of lots of little jars of interested things that are probably fermented or dried. And what cooking projects have you done recently? And like, what are you finding right now?
Oh man. I've been pickling a lot lately. Alexis Nicole just posted a really good magnolia pickle recipe. So I've tried it with a couple different kinds of magnolias, and that's been great.
Mm.
I've also been experimenting a little bit with ramps, which are a fraught topic because they take
Yes.
about a decade to grow and people dig them up indiscriminately. But I've been using ramp leaves and trying to find some interesting new ways to stretch them. I've always got a fermentation project going. I love lacto fermentation. And I do a lot of dehydrating now. Actually, yeah, my dehydrator's going at the moment. I have some
Excellent.
cherry blossoms in there. I've been making a lot of like sweets too. So I have a violet syrup that was kind of a thing on TikTok briefly. I'm always making like syrups and vinegars and dehydrating stuff. Yeah.
And
I have
mean,
some
I guess
mushroom jerky I need to send you.
Oh, that's cool. I'd be into that. How do you, I mean, in some ways, because I do this a lot where I like preserve mushroom things, and my partner hates this because now our freezer is so full of like mushroom stuff that she's like trying to put like a bag of frozen berries in and she can't. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, there's like so many different kinds of frozen mushrooms. Do you actually manage to use this stuff? Like, do you integrate it with your cooking? Does it become part of your everyday life? Or do you look at these things and they look pretty on shelves? How do you use it? And that's the brilliance of Noma, is not just making everything, but actually figuring out
But
how to use
using
it.
everything
Yeah,
and using
yeah.
it in a timely manner. Definitely having the ability to preserve things for later use is great. Everything that I bring in ends up getting eaten at some point. But sometimes there are things that I just sort of save for special occasions because it was either a real pain to gather, or it was a real pain to make. And when you put that much labor into what you consume, you kind of think twice before using it. But then there are times where something is just so good and you can't stop eating it. A lot of my syrups end up going very, very quickly because like right now, floral syrup is where it's at. I've just been making floral syrups like mad. And I gone in like 3 weeks.
Speaking of which, what's in your cup? Because I see you drinking this like cloudy pink beverage that looks
Yes.
like an absolute dream.
This
What's in there?
this is lemonade. It was just a regular lemonade, not a pink lemonade. I added violet syrup, and violets, as you know, are pH sensitive. So when you add an acid, they turn pink. So yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah, the anthocyanins, when you have acid, are pinkish red, and when they are higher than, I think it's pH of 3.4 is their pKa or something like that, it switches to kind of a bluey purple, which is in wine, it's a really big deal because that's Pinot Noir is right at that pKa point. So a lot of the times they'll like adjust the pH of Pinot Noir up or down just a little bit to try to get the color that they're actually looking for. Big deal in the wine industry. But
That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things I was curious about asking you, you're in Michigan, so clearly we have different climates, different, it's like 70 degrees, 75, 80, I don't know, it's hot here. It's hot and dry, and you're probably still in early spring / maybe winter. What are some of
We're
the sort of,
definitely in spring now.
okay, you're in spring. Okay, you're fully in spring. What are some of the like seasonal milestones that you're looking forward to over this coming year?
Oh boy. I always get really excited for chanterelle season. Chanterelles are like a big thing for me. I end up collecting pounds of them, and then they're one of those things where like I want to save them. I really do. But it doesn't happen. They're gone. They're gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So right now we are in the throes of ramp season. So a lot of the foraging groups have suddenly gained 200 new members, and suddenly everybody's talking and arguing about the correct way to forage for
to
ramps
harvest them.
and
Yeah.
and that's a whole thing. But our morel season is likely to start in the next few days. So that's a big deal. I always get really excited for berries too. I love hunting for mushrooms because of the treasure hunt aspect of it. You kind of have to know where to look, but also there's an element of chance to it.
Hmm.
But there is something about walking into a berry patch and just shutting your brain off and just picking berries for hours.
Hand to mouth is
Hand to mouth.
sometimes the best. Well, because it harkens back to that being that little kid in the blueberry patch, right? It's,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
think
there's something profoundly meditative about it.
yeah, I love feeling like a bear, like quite honestly, just like I am part of nature right now, and I'm out here with the birds and the bees and everything, just doing it. It's good. It's very good. And chanterelles is that a spring or is it summer? That's a summer thing for you,
That's a
right?
summer thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely like late summer to maybe the very, very beginning of fall when
Okay.
we'll see them. Yeah. And of course, like a lot of the time I'm just thinking in terms of mushrooms, but there are lots of other things I like to eat too. I'm excited to start seeing like some miner's lettuce around and start eating salad for every meal.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn from you about just more of the general foraging because while I've been like so focused on mushrooms, I've been kind of undereducated on some of the other things that I can forage and find. And being an East Coaster, I feel like I have sort of an innate knowledge of things on the East Coast that I could eat. But being here in California, I'm like, I don't know. I like know so little about the ecology, and I've been again learning season after season, but it still feels so foreign and alien to me sometimes every time I go out. So it's really nice to like watch people who kind of do really good videos on educating people about what wild edibles are out there. So
Cool.
it's good to see. So other thing I wanted to ask, ethics. I want to talk about foraging ethics a little bit. Because
I
you
love this conversation.
keep talking about ramps and like, this is super contentious. Do you want to like kind of lay out like the argument on ramps and like why it's so contentious?
Yeah. So a lot of the issue with ramps is, like I said earlier, they take about a decade to grow to full maturity. And there's a fairly sustainable way to harvest ramps. It involves only harvesting leaves and only harvesting them from very mature plants. Because of, math, if you harvest more than 10% of a patch, it's not sustainable because the next year you come back, the patch is smaller. The main problem is not individual foragers. It's people who make a living foraging, selling to restaurants. And those restaurants want the full plant. They want the bulb. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many people I've run across in the woods who have a shovel and a bucket and they're just digging up these 10-year-old plants. And it's kind of heartbreaking to see. My personal ethos of foraging is not something that I expect everyone to adhere to, but I would hope that common sense is something that people could get behind. If we want to continue eating these things, we have to approach sustainability with some sense. Right now, in parts of the United States, ramps are very plentiful, but abundance isn't the same thing as sustainability. Right. If we take that approach with ramps, we could end up with a passenger pigeon situation. I personally don't sell the things that I forage. I try to take what I'm going to personally use and what the people around me that I feed are going to eat. And like, that's fine for me. I don't have a problem with people making money foraging. Like, it's labor, and if you want to sell the things you forage, you should be compensated for it. But you should also go out in the woods and know that you don't own them. You're right. Part of everything that's going on.
And know that if you're out there making a living off of that nature, like, your living and the future of your living is dependent on how you make it. Your practices will influence what's there next season, right?
And you're responsible for that future. You have a responsibility to that ecosystem, to that environment, if you want to continue going there and earning that living.
Yeah. And again, for all intents and purposes, ramps are basically the same thing as a green onion or green garlic,
Yes.
which are commercially cultivated and you can buy, you know, I don't know if people have tried
Hmm.
green garlic, but it's phenomenal. I mean, there's a lot of things in common with ramps. Uh,
Yeah, there are so many wild alliums, Gordon. There are so many, and people get hung up on this one, the just ramps. And go out in your yard. Your kid has probably found field garlic. It's it grows everywhere. It's a weed. You can eat it. Just go out in your yard and try that. It tastes like a wild onion. It tastes like wild garlic because it is.
yep.
There are other types of wild garlic that don't take a decade to grow and taste just as good.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's, you know, there's ethics to how you forage, and there's also just the sense of like, well, what else could I do that might be a nice alternative to this thing
Yeah.
that is somewhat threatened and, you know, it is contentious about how and when people should harvest them.
Yeah,
Um,
and there are so many things out there that are invasive that you can eat, like garlic mustard. You can eat garlic mustard. It's great. And it's also everywhere and it chokes out native species. And so you're doing the environment a favor by gathering all of it.
and that's a great point too. I think a lot of people get really concerned about like, oh, well, I shouldn't, you know, like again, people always accuse me of like somehow I'm hurting nature or something like that. And I'm like, you know, if you see me cut up a mushroom, that was a mushroom that was going to get eaten up by a slug and or rot over the next week. And usually when I cut it up, I just leave it where it was. I'm not taking it out of the environment somehow. I'm not destroying it. I'm just kind of hastening along the process of nature. And sometimes I've even like cut up a mushroom and come back and be like, oh, hey, look at that slug is just going to town. You know,
Oh,
he
yeah.
enjoys that I cut up his dinner for him. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that's an important thing of why it's so good to get people out into nature because they get out there, they gain this sense of mental health, they gain a sense of being part of something larger, that there is this holistic world that does not revolve around them, but in fact is functioning. They are coming to it, seeing it, and recognizing that that exists regardless of their input. And that in some ways helps you understand how insignificant you can be as a person, but also helps you understand that if you go in there and you cause damage, that has made a significant impact on that ecosystem. So that while you are part of a less significant whole, we as humans have some responsibility to the nature that we visit, that we care about, to protect it, to be stewards of our environment.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. We cannot approach nature with a colonizer mindset. If we want to continue being able to exist in nature, if we want to continue to be surrounded by nature, we have the responsibility to approach it with care and respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just so excited that there's like people on social media trying to teach others about that. And TikTok's a tricky one because there's a lot of literal children on there who, man, they can be mean sometime. I'm like, I'm really glad I'm not in middle school right now and that I like managed to get through most of like middle school and high school without social media being a thing. But like, holy crap, kids are so
Oh
mean.
yeah. Oh, it would have destroyed my mental health. Like I'm already sensitive. I was so much worse when I was in middle school.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't, you know, I don't blame the kids potentially for being, I mean, I do blame them for being so mean, but I get it in some ways because maybe it's a defense mechanism because you're insecure and because it's easy to leverage things at people on the internet
Mhm.
and certainly, you know, in TikTok too. Like, you know, you have talked a little bit about like how does it feel when people comment on you, on your physical appearance, on the way that you talk, on your mannerisms, and you're like, wow. I'm just trying to teach you guys about like ramps. Why are you coming at me about like my hair or like the way, you know, the way I look? It doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, yeah. And like the homophobia and people just asking like insanely personal questions or being extremely rude in a live or something. I can mostly ignore it at this point because I know that they're it's because I'm a very easy target. I've put myself out there, and so
Hmm.
somebody's going to throw a rock now and again.
Hmm.
Um, but it doesn't make it less painful.
Painful. Yeah, no, I hear you. And I will say, I appreciate you putting yourself out there. And I know that people have reached out to me after I've said things that I believe in and I've been attacked for it. People are like, hey, I believe you and I appreciate that you've said that. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you, thank you for being who you are because I think it's important. Much like when I talked to Alexis Nicole, me and her talked about being loud nerds. And I was asking her, this was early on before she really blew up, but I was like, Alexis, how do you deal with some of the negative feedback? And she's like, you know what? I clap back, but I try to do it in a positive way. And honestly, like, I'm a loud nerd. I'm not going to let people silence me. And I think that's really important. When you're authentic to who you are and you say what you want to say, like, don't stop. Don't let people detract from that, because like some people are going to really love it. Some people are going to hate it, and you can block them or, do whatever you want with them. Unfortunately, TikTok has this weird glitch with the system where you can just report people ad nauseum if you don't like what they post, which is frustrating. But like, again,
Yes.
on our end, you just keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully people will gravitate towards that and learn from you, because it's, we can pass on that sense of responsibility to others. So
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, it's a silly clock app, but it's been nice to, at the very least, like, gain some community, meet people like you, meet people who are out there just trying to educate about science and about nature. And, it's stupid, but it's fun.
yeah. Well, that community thing for me has been huge. That's the whole reason I started doing these live interviews. It's just because I'm like stuck at home with my wall of mushroom stuff, and I'm like, I am going out of my head being home alone all day long. So I started just like, hey, can I like talk to people that I'm interested in, and like reaching out and finding community on Instagram. And TikTok particularly has been really interesting, because I feel like on Instagram, the community is a little bit more insular, and there's like accounts that you follow. Whereas because TikTok has that sort of For You page, you could just be catapulted into areas people you have no relationship to, but they can become fascinated and start following you. And it's really been an interesting way to form connections with people. And yeah, I'm just really impressed by some of the people I've seen on there. And you are, at that top of that list of people that I think are really great on TikTok. So
Thank you. You are much the same.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. TikTok is weird, but out of all of the social media, it's one of the things that makes the most sense to me. You have to be so snappy. You have to be so concise. Like if I made a YouTube channel, I don't think that it would go so well, because I have the tendency to just like scream into the abyss about the things I'm interested in, without any regard to how long I've been keeping somebody sitting there. At the very least, and maybe you're similar, but TikTok gives me an outlet to yell about my interests to people who care about them, instead of constantly bothering my loved ones with mushroom pictures.
Well, that's why I started Fascinated by Fungi as a whole, because I was like, on my normal Instagram, I was just starting, but I was like, I'm literally just going to post mushroom photos. And I was like, maybe I should start a separate account so that I don't just abuse everyone I know with like constant photos of mushrooms. Turned into something, so why not?
Yeah, absolutely it did.
But I think, if people want to learn more from you, you've posted quite a bit on TikTok. And so that's a great place to go and find you and see your educational content. You haven't yet done a ton of that on Instagram, but maybe?
I should do more, and I will do more.
You could just repost some of your good video. I mean, you have a lot of good videos, so, put them up. People would love to learn. I mean, there is, again, a good community here on Instagram too, as well as on TikTok. And on Instagram, I feel like it's almost easier to find that community than on TikTok, where there's just so
it definitely
much noise.
Seems like there's a broad academic community on Instagram, and I'm very interested in that. There are some great accounts on here, like Alan Rockefeller is always posting these incredible photos of mushrooms, and Leo Mycelia, just like, and you, and all of these people who are very, very like academically inclined, and they're posting these very detailed captions, and I love seeing that. So I should get in on it a bit more.
Yeah. At the same time that the snappiness of TikTok makes things kind of fun and engaging, and I don't know, social media is very weird, but I'm just very appreciative of the people who like take the time to make it fun, make it entertaining, and just more than anything, just make it educational, because it's important. We need that exposure. We need that education, because there's going to be people who see stuff from the videos where someone's just kind of doing a clickbaity thing, like, oh, mushrooms make you sick because they contain a carcinogen, and you're like, yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
But we have to talk about it in 60 seconds and somehow encompass all the points and the nuance in in a sliver.
I feel like my bio has just gone out of control because I just keep posting more sources and like more things for people to look at. And I don't know if anybody looks at them, but at least they're there. At least we have like some sort of scientific backing for the things that are being said.
It's good. I mean, that's the best we can do is just try to hang in there and like again, you know, put good stuff out in the world. There's a certain element of faith I think that goes into sending stuff out there where you're like, hey, I'm going to keep making stuff. Doesn't really matter what the reception is. I'm just going to kind of keep putting it out there. Some things will hit, some things won't. Things that I never expected to hit will hit, and things that I put a lot of effort into will just dive into nothingness.
Yep.
And that's life. That's what this is. But, you know, it's, I think for me, and I'm sure for you, like we do it for the people who care. We do it for the people who are interested. And, you know, we appreciate everyone who's learning from us and hopefully like deciding to become more involved with nature in their own lives, and maybe gaining some of those benefits we talked about, like mental health and wanting to get out and connect with where you live and what the seasonality is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good stuff. Well,
absolutely.
I guess, did I have anything else I wanted to ask you about? There was, I mean, again, I could just kind of keep peppering you with questions, but I usually like to try to keep these things to about an hour. And we've hit that. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining me, and I'm looking forward to everything that you do. I'm looking forward to definitely seeing like when morels hit, because everyone is so horny for morels all the damn time.
Yeah.
And they don't even really understand what morels are. But again, we'll keep trying to teach them, get people informed.
We'll keep calling them a mushroom because functionally it makes more sense too, but...
Yep. Well, I'm looking forward to what you've got to do. I'm gonna go listen to some of your music somewhere. Is it, you know,
cool.
so your website is GabrielleCerberville.com, right?
Yep.
People can find you on TikTok. You're here on Instagram. You got anything else out there that people should be looking out for, projects or things you're involved with?
Not too much at the moment. I am really excited that I'm going to be going to Panama next year for like a combination artist residency research trip. So I'll keep you posted on what happens with that. It'll be super remote, and I just want to find all the mushrooms.
That sounds really cool. Yeah, subtropical regions or tropical regions have a vast diversity of fungi. They're usually very small because there's not much, like temperate forests have larger mushrooms, and then those like warm rainforests have a huge biodiversity, but everything tends to be fairly small because there's not as much substrate for them to feed on. But yeah, that'll be interesting.
I'm excited. That'll be cool. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I'm going to keep an eye on your account. I'm going to, as always, like the things you do, appreciate the cooking you do. You know, your Chanterelle earrings are super cool. And just thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. And maybe I can make it out to Michigan someday to run around the woods with you and find some puffballs. So
awesome. Thank you so much. This was super fun.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.